Welcome to our webinar titled Biosimilars, Treatment Options for Patients. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lee Clark, Director of Patient Services, and I'll be moderating the presentation today. As we get started, I'd like to recognize the generous support of our corporate sponsors, Amgen, Alexion, Apellis, Taiho Oncology, and Merck. I'd also like to recognize the generous support of our patients, families, and caregivers for supporting the webinar today. Each year, we host conferences for patients and families around the United States. We have 2 conferences left this year. Our next conference will be in New Haven, Connecticut on Saturday, October the 14th. And our last conference will be in Dallas, Texas on November the 4th. Registration is open on our website for both conferences at this time. Our web address is aamds.org. Each year we host March for Marrow walks around the United States to help raise awareness for bone marrow failure diseases. Our last walk of this year will be held in Virginia. The walk will happen on Sunday, October the 1st. If you're local, we hope that you'll be able to register and join us. However, if you're not local, you can still participate and walk virtually with us. You can register and find out more information about our March for Marrows on our website. And again, our website address is aamds.org. Immediately following the presentation, there will be a question and answer session. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. To submit your questions, use the Q&A icon in the engagement panel on your right. To submit your question or comment, just open the engagement panel, type in your question in the Q&A text box window, and when you finish typing, just hit enter. We'll be sure to get to everyone's questions today. When asking questions, I do ask that you do 2 things to help me manage the incoming questions. Please submit your question all at the same time, and please do not share private health information in your question. Our expert today cannot answer any specific questions related to your personal health care. Our specialist today is Cate Lockhart, and she is the Program Director for the Biologics and Biosimilars Collective Intelligence Consortium, where she is responsible for both the business and research programs for this large multi-stakeholder research collaboration. Cate has 3 undergraduate degrees, a BS in electrical engineering, a BS in visual communications, and a BFA in theater arts. She completed 3 advanced degrees from the University of Washington in Seattle, PharmD, MS in health economics and outcomes research, and a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences. With that said, it is my extreme pleasure to welcome Cate Lockhart.
Well, thank you so much, Lee. I will share my slides here. All right, are those up and visible?
They look great, Cate. Thank you.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks again, Lee, for the invitation to speak. This is a topic that's very near to my heart. I live and breathe biosimilars as part of my work. So I'm happy to be here to talk about biosimilars, what they are, what are some of the specifics around what is a biosimilar, and then we'll talk about some of the current biosimilars that are available in the US and what they're treated for. And that's what I just said. Here we are. So first of all, I'd like to start with a discussion about what is a biologic drug. So we think of drugs in two main categories. One is chemical drugs, or you might hear the term small molecule drugs, and biologic drugs. And there's some significant differences between the two. So first of all, with the chemical drugs or small molecule drugs, these are well defined. It is a chemical molecule. We know exactly what it is. It has a simple structure. These are usually quite small molecules, and they don't vary at all or very little between one molecule and another. And these are often, when you take a medication like this, it may target more than one part of your body. If you think of when you take a Tylenol or a pain reliever, then it's not focusing just on one specific spot, but it's targeting all of the pain receptors, for example. And these are usually oral drugs. So these are the pills that you pick up from the pharmacy. A biologic drug, on the other hand, is a very large molecule. The composition of it is defined to a certain extent, but there's some variability, and I'll talk more about what that means in a few more slides. As I said, they're complex, they're very large in relationship to the chemical drugs, and there can be variation between each of these molecules, again, for reasons that I'll get into in a few minutes. These are usually quite specific, targeted therapies, and usually they have to be injected or infused to bypass the gastrointestinal system. And so in the same way that we talk about a brand and a generic, the same relationship occurs with a reference product and a biosimilar. A reference product is the original product, what we would think of as a brand product for a chemical drug, and then the biosimilar is philosophically like a generic. Uh-oh. So here's a few examples of what I mean when I say chemical drugs. So aspirin, that's a chemical drug. Ibuprofen, your pain reliever. Atorvastatin, if you have a cholesterol medicine, or metoprolol, which is a blood pressure medicine. An antibiotic, azithromycin. These are all small molecule drugs or chemical drugs. And again, they're taken orally, and these particular ones are used quite commonly. Biologic drugs, some examples are adalimumab, which you might recognize as Humira. This is an anti-inflammatory medication for treatment of diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. Infliximab, which is called Remicade. The originator product is Remicade, also an anti-inflammatory. Trastuzumab is a cancer drug for breast cancer, and the brand name is Herceptin for the reference product. And pegfilgrastim, which I think some people in this audience may be familiar with, which is the brand product is called Neulasta, and that's for treating low white blood cell counts. To give you some context of what I mean by small molecule and large molecule, here's a nice illustration of some of the difference. So if we take aspirin, which is a small, simple molecule, it's 21 atoms in an aspirin molecule. And then we equate that with something in complexity like a bicycle. And then if we go up to a large molecule drug, this can be a variety of like hormones or growth factors. And these are larger molecules, so you can see the relationship in size between the aspirin and the HGH picture in the middle, which is similar in size and complexity to a bicycle versus a car. And a large biologic, which is what we're talking about here, are very much bigger than an aspirin and even bigger than the large molecule drugs. They have on the order of 25,000 atoms within them. They're very often an antibody or some other kind of protein that is made by your body. And again, with the similar association of scale, when you go from a bicycle in complexity to a car, and then you go to an airplane, that's how to think of the complexity and the size of a small molecule drug versus a large biologic drug. So in general, biologic products could be proteins. As I mentioned, they may, your body is full of lots of proteins that help regulate your cells and all of your body systems. So it could be a protein that controls other proteins. It could be a gene that controls the production of a protein. Human hormones are biologic products. And any cells that suppress or activate your immune system. So we can think of products such as a vaccine would be considered a biologic. So I'm going into this in some detail because I think this is the important piece of a biologic drug. Biologic drugs are made in a living system. So a cell culture, for example, and I'll go through a little bit more about the process of that, or it contains parts of a living organism, like a vaccine, where you might have a little piece of a virus so that your body learns to recognize it. In this case, we're going to focus on the types of biologics that are produced by a living organism. So a biologic drug is made in a living system. They're made in a lab. They're often developed in cell cultures. E. coli is a really commonly used cell, not the kind that causes food poisoning, but there's some other strains that are benign, but they're inexpensive and easy to maintain. So you start with a very highly controlled cell culture where you have your E. coli cells growing. And then you treat those cells with DNA that will make the protein that you want to make. So the DNA will go into the E. coli cells in this case, and it will use the existing biological machinery inside of the cell to produce these protein strands. There's the little red strands that are coming out of the E. coli in the picture. And then as the proteins are formed, the cells continue to make more. And so they produce this replicating process of these protein strands. And then this is what makes your biologic drug. And then the biologic drug is removed, purified, processed, and can be used as medicine. So at this point, they might add some non-active ingredients to make sure that there's enough volume to inject it, or to make sure that the pH is adjusted so that it's not going to hurt when you have an injection, for example. So this is what I mean when we say these are produced in a living system. It's in a cell culture such as this. All right, so how do you get from the strand of the protein strand, which is a strand of amino acids, to the final biologic drug? The answer is protein folding. So here's a generalized process of protein folding. You have your primary structure, which is what was produced by the cells. It's the string of specific amino acids in a specific order, and those have a natural tendency to attract one another in certain specific ways. And so that strand will fold itself into a structure that is most natural for it. And then that secondary structure can join with other secondary structures to create this tertiary structure. And then tertiary structures can then join to make this quaternary structure. And this is usually where what the biologic drug is. So you can see how complex and how potentially large these systems are. So this is a very complex process. The process and the dynamics of how a protein folds is very sensitive to the environment that it's in. So the cell cultures and your production mechanisms have to be very, very specific and very precise. And the reality is the proteins do not necessarily fold exactly the same time as each time, even with the same order of amino acids, but that's okay. Some variability doesn't impact how it works as a medicine. And to bring that into a little bit of a different context, just because of the nature of it being a biologic drug and it's a very complex molecule with all of these interacting forces, if you will, each dose of a drug, each vial, each batch of a product might be a little bit different. It will be a tiny bit different. And that's just because it's a biologic. But that doesn't matter in terms of how the product works as a treatment. So imagine a house key. So the end that goes into the lock has to have a specific configuration, but the handle doesn't really matter as much. So as long as what I have is the business end here is the same shape and has the same configuration to fit the lock, that's all you need. So if you think of that in terms of a biologic drug, what you need is the piece that goes into the lock. And that's what's going to interact with your cell and create the treatment effect. Okay, so we're here to hear about biosimilars. So why have I spent all this time talking about the biochemistry of biologic drugs? Well, a biosimilar is a biologic drug. And it's important to understand the context of biologic drugs because it helps us understand some things that may be confusing about biosimilars. So according to the FDA definition of biosimilar, it's a biological product that is highly similar to the reference product, although there could be differences, especially in the clinically inactive compounds, but there are no clinically meaningful differences between the originator product, which is the biological product here, and the reference product in terms of safety, purity, potency of the product. So that means, as I've been discussing up to this point, it's impossible to have two proteins that are 100% identical, but it's okay. Like with the key, just the certain parts that are active need to be active and consistent across different molecules, and you'll still get that same treatment effect. Interchangeability. This is a term that often causes some confusion. It is a statutory term. It's actually written into the law, and all it means is that a pharmacist is able to substitute a biosimilar for a reference product without first telling the prescriber. And this is the typical pharmacy level substitution that happens with generic drugs. So the concept is the same, but it adds some complexity. So the product has to be approved as a biosimilar. So it has to go through the rigorous process of being approved as a biosimilar. But there may be additional clinical studies or analytical requirements that makes it a little bit of a longer process potentially. But it's not a better than, it's just a in addition to from a biosimilar. So a little bit about the regulatory process. Biosimilars became in existence in the United States based on the Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act of 2009, which was enacted in 2010. This was associated with the Affordable Care Act. And this created an abbreviated review pathway similar to a generic drug pathway, specifically for biologics to become biosimilars. So that opened the door for biosimilars to start being produced, and it provides some incentive for biosimilars manufacturers because it is an abbreviated pathway. So to compare what that means, here's a typical framework for FDA approval of a new biologic, so not a biosimilar. There's certainly lots of time, lots of laboratory testing. There may be some animal studies involved. And then you start with small clinical trials in humans. This is a phase 1 trial. And then you move to a medium-sized clinical trial in real patients. And then a phase 3 large-scale clinical trial. And there often has to be more than one of these studies. So the emphasis is really on the clinical trial aspect of it, where you're seeing how this product really works in human populations. Now, the difference with a biosimilar pathway, they emphasize the totality of evidence. And one is that we have quite a few years of experience on using the reference product already. So this isn't a brand new product. This is a biosimilar. And so the emphasis is a lot more on the analytical end, the laboratory testing, to make sure that you have the amino acid sequence the same as the reference product. And then you look at some things like toxicity and route of administration. And you might do some animal studies. You might do some studies in humans, but those clinical studies really depend upon the product, and not all products are required to conduct these clinical trials. And usually they can be a bit smaller than in the originator product process. So let's go into the biosimilars that we have in the US. So far, as of September, there have been 42 biosimilars approved. 37 of those have been launched and are available in the United States. And I provided a source here. This is a really nice resource to keep an eye on biosimilars that have been approved and what's available in the market and what's coming up in the pipeline. And so I'm going to go through some pieces of this document just to highlight where we are with biosimilars in the US. So the first class is supportive care. These are the filgrastim, pegfilgrastim. We often hear those called granulocyte colony stimulating factors. And this is preventing severely low white blood cells that can be due to different cancer medications or some other genetic disease processes. And then epoetin alpha is a treatment for anemia that's often used in patients with kidney dialysis or sometimes cancer medications. So these are supporting or preventing some side effects or bad treatment reactions with other clinical care, such as cancer chemotherapy. There's a handful of drugs for oncology that are biosimilars. There's these 3 listed here: rituximab, which is the reference product is Rituxan. That's for cancers such as non-Hodgkin lymphoma, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and it's also can be used in some diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis patients sometimes are given rituximab as well. So you can see we have 3 available biosimilars in the US. The second is bevacizumab, and that's treatment for several cancers. They're listed on the right. The reference product is Avastin. There are 4 options there. And trastuzumab, this is Herceptin, and this is for breast cancer, stomach and esophageal cancers that are HER2 positive. So this has been a quite successful product, and now there are 5 biosimilar products available. and they're all getting some good utilization. So it's offering options to patients. Because philosophically, as I mentioned before, in terms of generics, philosophically, the whole point of biosimilars is creating market competition to help reduce prices of healthcare. Insulin, that's another biologic product. It's a treatment for diabetes. And you can see there's a little yellow box that says INT on those two biosimilars that have been launched. That means those have also been designated to be interchangeable, which means a pharmacist can automatically substitute for a reference product at the point of sale. We're just starting to see some drugs for eye diseases, some biosimilars for eye diseases. Lucentis is for wet AMD or macular edema and some other retinal diseases of the eye. There are two biosimilars, and you can see there one of them is listed as interchangeable. And then we have quite a few of these immunomodulators. So these are treatments for autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. And there is now, you can see on the far right side of the purple box, there's one new treatment. It was just recently approved and it's a treatment for multiple sclerosis. But otherwise, we have quite a few treatment options now for these different immunomodulating therapies. And this is these next couple of slides are just showing what is in the biosimilar pipeline. What can we expect in the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years to come into the market? And you can see there's some repetition here. So we'll be seeing some additional biosimilars for those supportive care drugs and the oncology drugs. We're expecting to see some more ophthalmology drugs for eye treatments. You can see under that, the Eylea reference product, there's 9 biosimilars that are currently in various stages of production. So this is really good, giving people a lot more options for their treatment choices for the same product. And this is the immunomodulator space is where there's going to be a lot of biosimilars coming in. You can see there's still some infliximab, which is the Remicade. Those 3 on the left already have existing biosimilars, but there's more coming out. But then all the rest of them are products that don't have biosimilar yet, but they're also very commonly used. And these are the treatments for rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease and other diseases such as that. And then finally, there's some other products for bone health and some growth hormone biosimilars that are coming out that are in, again, various stages. So we'll probably start seeing some of these in the next few years, probably, most likely. So I'm going to wrap up here with a picture of what the impact of biosimilars are in US healthcare. So these data are coming from just 2021. And at that point, there were 91% of all prescriptions that were filled in the US were filled with generics or biosimilars. So that's a lot. I think that's probably not too surprising for most people, as when you go to the pharmacy to pick up your medications, you usually are getting a generic of the medication. So very, very many prescriptions filled with generics and biosimilars, but that 91% of prescriptions only accounts for 18.2% of the amount of money that is spent on prescription drugs. So I'll let that set in for a second. That means the other 9% that are not generics or biosimilars are accounting for 80% of all of the drug spending. So that's why it's so important. That's why biosimilars are so important, because we're looking at biologics, which are already very expensive treatments, but they're also very successful treatments, and being able to apply some market pressure to those products is really having an impact on overall healthcare spending. And again, just in 2021, using generics and biosimilars saved $93 billion in the US. If there had not been generics or biosimilars available, the US healthcare system would have spent $93 billion more just in 2021. And just for biosimilars in 2021, the savings rose to about $7 billion just for 2021. So these are making some impacts on healthcare spending and on patient access. We're seeing patients are getting access to biosimilars or biologic treatments potentially a little bit sooner than they may have otherwise. Populations that maybe didn't have access to a biologic treatment do now because there's more available. So again, this was digging into a little bit more detail on the $7 billion savings in 2021. That's for biosimilars for just 7 different drugs, 7 different products listed here. So you saw how many products are in the pipeline as well that are due to be coming out in the next 1 to 5 years, and the projected savings is anticipated to be about 180 billion in a 5-year period. So it's a significant savings to the healthcare system, and this is a result of more biosimilars to more reference products overall. To give a sense of how many products people are using biosimilars, here's a little table that I put together to show the number of biosimilars in each of these categories that are available right now. Well, this is 2021 data. So this has changed a bit since then. But you can see that by 2021, the percentage of prescriptions or treatments that were using biosimilars has grown to over 50% in most of these cases, a little bit less in a few. And we're seeing that trend continuing, because again, it gives patients more options, and their payers more options. And obviously it's a benefit to the healthcare system. And this is one product that was not in the prior lists. This is a Humira, which is adalimumab. That is treatment for these inflammatory diseases: rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile idiopathic arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, plaque psoriasis, hidradenitis suppurativa, and uveitis. Just this year, 8 biosimilars were launched on the market. Many of them had been approved several years ago, but there was, through patent litigation and contract negotiations, they all launched in the middle of 2023. So this has a potential of making a big impact on patients as well, with having many more options, decreasing prices. And so 2024 is going to be a really interesting time to be watching this particular biosimilar, because that's when it'll really start to be used. And that's when payers will start to perhaps prefer a biosimilar over a reference product. And so that's going to be a big deal for our healthcare system. Humira is the largest grossing drug in the world. the amount of people that are using the product, there's a lot of people who are using the product. And so this has a potential to have a big impact on healthcare spending and access to care. So in summary, hopefully it's clear that biologic drugs are very complex. They all have some variability, but that does not affect any of the safety or effectiveness of them as treatments. And biosimilars are biologics, so all of these characteristics that we talked about for biologics are also carry over to biosimilars. And we're seeing there is a real improvement in access to patient care for biologics, and certainly reducing the costs of these otherwise very expensive biologic drugs. But it's an important category of drugs because they are very successful and they are very good at treating the diseases that they've been designed for. So I'd like to open it up. I wanted to make sure that there was plenty of time for questions. And Lee, I think you are fielding questions, so I'd be happy to provide some insights on those.
Great. Thanks so much, Cate. We do have a few questions here. Our first question is, are clinical trials required for biosimilars?
That is a great question. And the answer is sometimes. Well, usually at least a clinical trial is required. The size of that clinical trial and specifically what they are studying may be a slightly different depending on the product, but they are required to show, they have to demonstrate, the manufacturer has to demonstrate that there is in fact no clinically meaningful difference in safety, immune reactions, and effectiveness of the drug. So there are comparative clinical trials that are done for most studies or most biosimilars that compare the biosimilar to the reference product. The challenge with clinical trials is you're not expecting any difference. So it makes it sometimes challenging and maybe not that useful to look at a clinical trial if you can really verify that this molecule is the same or is as the same as it could be as the originator product. And what we're finding is that the analytical pieces are in fact much more informative for being able to say, yes, this is in fact biosimilar, and it doesn't act differently when it's given to a patient. We also have, so in Europe, they've been using biosimilars have been available for much longer. They had their first biosimilar was approved in 2006, and our first biosimilar was approved in 2015. And so we also can learn some things about the clinical, like regular clinical care with biosimilars from European patients. And I think there's a lot of people and prescribers and regulatory officials that are starting to pay more attention to existing experience with these, because again, to do a clinical trial where you're trying to show that nothing is different, that can be really challenging.
Thank you for that. Our next question comes from a PNH patient who is currently being treated with eculizumab, which it says you mentioned on your slide, and looks like there'll be some biosimilars coming available. They'd like to know, how do you know if a biosimilar has been through a clinical trial? And would there be data for the patient to be able to review before if they decide to use a biosimilar and go off of what they're currently using?
Mm-hmm. So the the FDA labels for biosimilars are that all biosimilars also have a label that will describe any clinical trials that were done, any clinical studies. If you're really ambitious, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and do a search there for usually under the product name. The search isn't always great, but it'll point you in some directions, and you can see where in the stages of clinical studies these products are. The pipeline chart that I showed does list what stage of clinical studies these products are in. There's always a study of pharmacokinetics, and that's what does your body do to the drug and what does your drug do to the body. So that's always a piece. That's one really powerful way to show that there is no clinically meaningful difference. So those will usually there's usually publications available for those types of products. And the whole idea of an abbreviated pathway sometimes makes people a little bit nervous, because you think, well, then they're not studied as much, which really is not the case here. It's a way to incentivize manufacturers while still undergoing this rigorous FDA approval process, but trying to make the process more efficient because we already have experience. Now, I think there's a lot of there is a lot of information available out there. Sometimes it can be challenging to find it, but certainly working with your prescriber, they likely have seen some clinical trial studies that would be available to you to look at as well. So there is lots of information out there. The timing of the information depends a little bit. Some of it may not be available until, if it's a trial that was used for biosimilar approval, there may be a lag time before you see a publication, but there's usually several publications that come available.
Thanks, Cate. Our next question is, if I'm already using a treatment that's working for me, what would be the benefits of switching to a biosimilar? And then part 2 of that question is, what if the biosimilar does not have the same treatment effect? Can I go back? What would be the ramifications of going back?
These are great questions, and these are questions that commonly come up, particularly with patients who are treated in a chronically with a biologic. That, and very often with many of these diseases, it's taken a long time to get to a place to find the right drug that's working for you and the right dose, and so I can understand there can be a lot of hesitation about switching to something else that you aren't quite sure about yet. And this is where it's so important to have the discussion with your doctor. But I have two things here. Given the rigor that it goes under to have the FDA deem it to be a biosimilar where there is no clinically meaningful difference, there certainly is some power behind that. We also have seen from European data that there have been lots of studies on switching from a reference product to a biosimilar, or from one biosimilar to a different biosimilar. And overall, and I'm talking on the order of like 150 plus studies have been done so far in a variety of different disease categories. And so far, there's not been any evidence of difference in people who switch. There is a possibility that if there is some really different excipient or one of the non-inactive ingredients that you happen to have a reaction to, then that obviously that's going to be a problem. There are some people that have, for whatever reasons, have switched to a biosimilar, and then switched back, and there's no problem doing that. The switchbacks tend to not be all that common. It turns out that really for most people, a biosimilar ends up working just the same. But there is always that option. And in terms of the benefit, if I get this concept too, that if it's already working for me, then what incentive is there? Why in the world would I change, even if scientifically it makes sense that it's going to be similar? And it's really on some level, it's a benefit to the whole healthcare system. So if we're saving $7 billion just on 7 different biosimilar products, then that's money that can go into other patient care, patient programs, things like that. Depending on the type of drug that you have, there may be, especially when we're getting into some specialty pharmacy drugs and products that are self-administered, so you don't have to go into the clinic for an infusion. Those are managed differently on an insurance plan, usually. And so that can have some impact on your out-of-pocket share, your co-insurance or co-pay. And I think we'll start to see more of that comes more directly to the patient with some of these products like the Humira biosimilars that are available. So it's not a simple situation for sure. And at the end of the day, the whole point of healthcare is taking care of patients. But the evidence really demonstrates that you shouldn't expect a difference by switching to a biosimilar.
Thanks, Cate. Are there any questions that you feel, if in communicating with my healthcare professional, that would be good for me to ask my physician about switching to a biosimilar? Are there some key questions that I should ask that would be helpful for me to make sure I'm getting the best information?
That is an excellent question. So I would say I would guess that switching to a biosimilar, most people who are taking products in this biologic category probably have, in most cases, a reasonably long relationship with their provider. And so it's really a good opportunity to have the discussions. I think one question would be, do they have any patients that they've been treating with biosimilars? Because that can help just as they start to get more experience as well with understanding biosimilars. And there's always the question of reimbursement and your health insurance plan. So you want to make sure that, and this may be a conversation with your prescriber, your provider, or with your insurance company. Do they have a preferred product? And asking what the benefit is for you. Asking your provider, this is related to the earlier question about where can you find information on clinical trials. If you're interested in looking at the data, that's a great question to ask and discussion to have with your provider as well, because likely they spend time looking at that literature for treatments that are relevant to their expertise. And so those are good questions to talk if you're feeling if you're ambitious about the science and understanding what the clinical trials actually showed. I think those are good questions as well.
Well, that is all the questions that we have for today. So thank you, Cate, so much for sharing your time and your expertise with all of us today. And if you'd like to watch the session again at a later time, it will be available on the webinar platform within the next hour. To access this session, click on replay, or you can also find this session by navigating the on-demand tab in the platform hub. If you have any additional questions, please send it to us at any time in 3 ways. Send an email to help@aamds.org. Give us a call at 800-747-2820, or send us your question to our Facebook page. On behalf of the Aplastic Anemia and MDS International Foundation, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and making us your resource of choice for information on bone marrow failure diseases. Our medical advisory board and team are always here to support you and your family, as we've done for the past 40 years. This concludes the webinar.